The wind howled like a starved wolf across the desolate peaks, driving shards of ice before it. Snow fell relentlessly, a thick, smothering shroud that stole the light and muffled the world into a deathly silence. Deep within that silence, broken only by the wind's cry and the low whimpers of her youngest, walked Nara. Her legs burned, her breath tore at her raw throat, and the weight of the bundled infant against her chest felt crushing. Yet she pushed on. Behind her, a ragged line of small forms stumbled through the drifts, her children, their faces gaunt with cold and fear. 10 of them, all that remained. The others, swallowed by the unforgiving land, or by the cruelty of men who saw them as less than vermin. Survival had been a constant, brutal companion since the soldiers came. Days blended into a blur of freezing hunger and desperate flight. Their moccasins were worn through. Their thin blankets offered little defense against the biting cold. The path they had followed, the trail of their ancestors, was now buried deep beneath the relentless white. They were lost, truly hopelessly lost. Despair was a heavy cloak threatening to pull her under, but the sound of a child's cough, thin and weak, jolted her. She could not falter. Not yet. Through the swirling snow, a shape materialized. Not rock, not tree. Too regular. Her heart leaped into her throat. A bird trapped in a cage of bone. Soldiers? Settlers? Her hand instinctively went to the worn knife tucked into her waist, a futile weapon against rifle fire. But the shape didn't fire. It grew, became clearer. A small, squat cabin, smoke curling bravely from its stone chimney, a beacon in the storm. And standing near the door, silhouetted against the faint light spilling from a window, was a man. A white man. Every instinct screamed danger. White men brought death, betrayal, sorrow. Yet the cold was a more immediate executioner. Her children were stumbling, some falling to their knees in the snow, too weary to rise. The smallest coughed again, a sound that ripped through Nara. She made a decision born of utter desperation, of a mother's raw, primal need. Holding the infant tighter, she gathered the last of her strength and called out, her voice thin but clear, carrying on the wind. The man turned. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the swirling snow and the distance, but she felt his gaze upon them. He didn't raise a weapon. He just stood, watching their slow, agonizing approach. Fear warred with a flicker of a different emotion, perhaps surprise, perhaps a grim understanding in his posture. As they drew nearer, she could see him more clearly. A cowboy, judging by his hat and coat, though his clothes were worn and simple. Not a soldier, not the kind of settler who rode in mobs. His face, when she could finally make it out, was weathered, lined, unreadable. It held a deep stillness, like a frozen lake. She stopped a few paces from him, her children huddled behind her, eyes wide and fearful, looking at the man and the cabin with a mixture of terror and a desperate, fragile hope. He looked at them, at her weary, frost-kissed face, the huddled children, the infant she cradled. His gaze lingered on the smallest ones, then swept back to her. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. After a long moment that felt like an eternity, he simply opened the door wider and stepped aside. It was not an invitation, not with words, but an action, stark and undeniable. The warmth that spilled out felt like a physical force, a promise. Nara hesitated for only a heartbeat longer, searching his impassive face for any sign of trap or malice. There was none, only that deep, unnerving stillness. Survival guided her feet. She nodded curtly, a gesture of acknowledgement more than thanks, and urged her children forward, into the light, into the uncertain safety offered by a stranger in the storm. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and something cooking, beans, perhaps, simple and warm. The contrast with the biting cold outside was immediate and profound. Nara's stiff muscles protested as she moved, helping her children shed their snow-laden blankets, guiding them towards the stone hearth where a fire blazed. The cowboy closed the door, sealing them inside, away from the storm's fury. He didn't hover. He didn't ask questions. He moved with a quiet efficiency, stirring the pot on the fire, pouring steaming liquid into dented tin cups. Coffee, she guessed, though she had rarely tasted it. For the children, he added water to the beans, making a thin, nourishing broth. He offered the first cup to her, his hand calloused, his gaze steady. She took it, her fingers clumsy with cold, and nodded again, a silent acknowledgement of the gift. She sipped the hot liquid. It burned her tongue but sent warmth spreading through her chest. She gave sips to the infant, then to the next youngest. The other children watched him with wide, cautious eyes, clinging to her skirt or huddling together by the fire. They were like frightened deer, ready to bolt. He ignored their fear, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He ladled the bean broth into bowls, setting them on the rough-hewn table. "Eat," he said. His voice was low, gravelly, the first sound she had heard him make. It was not unkind. Nara guided the children to the table. They ate slowly at first, then with the ravenous hunger of those who had known starvation. The cowboy sat by the fire, cleaning a rifle. He didn't watch them eat, his attention seemingly on his weapon, but she felt his presence, a quiet anchor in the small room. He was observant, she realized. He missed nothing. He saw their thinness, the weariness etched on their young faces, the way they ate as if fearing the food would vanish. She watched him too when she thought he wasn't looking. His face was hard, but his eyes, when they met hers for a fleeting moment, held no malice. There was a weariness there, perhaps loneliness. He was a man living alone in a place where few others dared to tread. An outsider, maybe like them. The thought offered a sliver of comfort. It wasn't much, but it was more than she had expected. As the children finished eating, they grew drowsy from the warmth and the food. He silently pointed to a corner of the cabin where blankets and furs were piled. Nara led her children there, helping them settle down. They curled into a tangle of small bodies, finding comfort in each other's presence. She lay down amongst them. The infant nestled close, listening to their soft breathing fill the quiet space. The cowboy remained by the fire, a silent guardian. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. The wind still howled outside, but it felt distant now, a sound that belonged to another world. Sleep was a luxury Nara had rarely afforded herself fully in recent times. Her nights were spent listening, watching, ready to flee. But here, in the stranger's cabin, surrounded by the rhythmic breathing of her children, a sense of safety, fragile but real, began to seep into her bones. She did not trust him completely. How could she trust any white man? But she trusted the warmth, the food he had shared without demand, the quiet space he had given them. He could have turned them away, left them to perish in the snow. He hadn't. Why, she didn't know. It was enough for now. As exhaustion finally claimed her, her last conscious thought was a prayer, not to any specific spirit, but a desperate plea to the universe to let this sanctuary last, just long enough for her children to regain their strength. She slept, a deep, heavy sleep, the first truly restful one in a long, long time. The first sound that woke her was not the wind, nor the cry of a child, but a different kind of sound. A sharp snap of a twig outside the cabin. Then another. Nara's eyes snapped open, her body tensing instantly. She listened, her senses on high alert, honed by years of living on the edge of danger. There were other sounds now, the muffled thump of hooves in the snow, the low murmur of voices. More than one voice, many voices. The cowboy was awake too. He wasn't by the fire. He was standing by the small window, peering out into the pre-dawn gloom. His stillness was different now, coiled, alert, like a mountain cat ready to spring. Nara rose silently, moving away from her still sleeping children, towards him. She didn't need words. She saw the grim set of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested near the rifle leaning against the wall. "What is it?" she whispered, the sound low and urgent in the quiet cabin. He didn't turn. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Settlers. Rode in during the night." Her blood ran cold. "Settlers. Here? How did they know? Was it coincidence, or had they been followed? Did they know she was Apache? The fear she had briefly escaped in sleep flooded back, sharper, more terrifying because her children were safe, warm, vulnerable here, trapped with her. "How many?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. "Enough," he said. "Maybe a dozen riders. They got the place surrounded." He finally turned from the window, his gaze meeting hers. There was no surprise in his eyes, only a weary acceptance, as if this was just another storm he had to weather. He didn't look at her with accusation, didn't blame her for bringing this to his door. That silent lack of resentment was more potent than any apology. "What do they want?" she asked, though she already knew. They wanted her. They wanted her children. They wanted them gone, removed, erased. "They ain't said yet," he replied. He moved towards the rifle, picking it up, checking the action with practiced ease. It was an old weapon, but well-maintained. Reliable. He looked capable, dangerous in a quiet way. The children began to stir, sensing the shift in the air, the tension emanating from the adults. The infant whimpered. Nara went back to them, gathering the youngest close. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat. She looked at her children's sleepy, innocent faces, unaware of the danger lurking just outside the thin walls of the cabin. A fierce, protective fire ignited within her, burning away the last vestiges of her despair and fear. She would not let them be taken. Not again. She looked back at the cowboy. He was reloading a pistol, his movements economical. He glanced at her, at the children. A flicker of something crossed his face, resolve. Maybe. He wasn't going to turn them out. He wasn't going to hand them over. This quiet, stoic man, a stranger who had offered them shelter from the snow, was now preparing to face down his own kind for them. The realization settled deep within her. He was choosing a side. Their side. "What will you do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. He looked at the door, then back at her. "Ain't got many options, do I? They want something. Gotta find out what it is." He didn't sound brave, just practical. Resigned, almost. But his stance was firm, his grip on the rifle steady. He was ready to defend his home, and the lives that now sheltered within it. Nara knew she had to be ready too. She tightened her grip on the infant, her eyes scanning the small cabin, searching for anything, any means of defense or escape, knowing there was none. They were trapped. Trapped, but not alone. Not anymore. A voice, rough and loud, shattered the pre-dawn quiet, carried across the snow, demanding attention. "Hey in there. We know you got Injuns in there. Bring 'em out." The cowboy didn't flinch. Nara's children whimpered, burying their faces against her skirts. She held them tighter, a silent promise of protection. She looked at the cowboy, then at the door. There was nowhere to run, only through. The cowboy walked towards the door, the rifle held loosely but ready. He didn't ask her permission, didn't explain his intentions. It was a silent, mutual understanding. He would face them first. He unbarred the heavy wooden door and pulled it open just enough to speak through the gap. The cold air rushed in, bringing with it the scent of pine and the chill of the tense morning. Nara stayed back, her body a shield for her children, her eyes fixed on the opening, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "What do you want?" The cowboy's voice was calm, steady, a stark contrast to the aggression from outside. "We want the Redskins, Harmon," the voice outside roared. "We know you hid 'em. Open up and hand 'em over, or we'll come in and take 'em." Harmon. That was his name. Harmon stood there, framed in the doorway, a solitary figure against the white landscape. Nara couldn't see the men outside, but she could feel their numbers, their anger, their collective intent. They saw her and her children not as people, but as things to be taken, removed. "They're just women and children," Harmon said, his voice still measured. Laughter, harsh and cruel, answered him. "Ain't no just about it, Harmon. They're vermin. Shoulda died in the snow where they belonged. We ain't having Apaches livin' amongst us. They ain't amongst you," Harmon replied. They're in my cabin. And they ain't leavin'. A tense silence stretched, broken only by the wind. Nara held her breath. This was it. The standoff. The moment where one man's quiet defiance met the collective hatred of many. She could feel the shift within herself. The despair was gone, replaced by a fierce, unyielding resolve. She would not hide. She would not be dragged out like an animal. Stepping away from her children, she moved towards the door, towards Harmon. She stood beside him, visible in the opening now, a woman of the Apache standing shoulder to shoulder with a white man, facing down others of his kind. Her posture was straight, her chin lifted. She met the unseen gaze of the settlers outside with a defiance that mirrored Harmon's, though she had no weapon. Her presence was her statement. There was a stunned silence from outside. They hadn't expected this. Expected him to be alone, perhaps, or for her to be cowering, not standing tall, visible, claiming her place beside him. Harmon glanced at her, a quick look, and she saw something in his eyes, not surprise, but a kind of grim approval. He didn't ask her to go back. He accepted her stand. The voice outside sputtered. Well, I'll be damned. He's taken up with them. You gone soft, Harmon? I ain't gone soft, Harmon said, his voice losing some of its calm, a hard edge creeping in. I just ain't cruel. They needed help. I gave it. Now leave. Another voice, sharper this time, cut in. We ain't leavin' till you hand 'em over. You're harborin' enemies. That makes you one too. Harmon raised his rifle slowly, deliberately. The sound of the action clicking was loud in the tense quiet. Take one more step towards this cabin, he said, his voice low but carrying authority. And I'll start shootin'. And I don't miss. The threat hung in the air. The settlers knew Harmon. Knew he was a man of few words, but a man who kept them. They knew his skill with a rifle. They were many, but they were exposed, and he was in cover. The equation had shifted. It wasn't just about taking vulnerable people anymore. It was about facing a dangerous man willing to protect them. The standoff stretched, the tension almost unbearable. Nara stood straight, her eyes scanning the landscape, her heart still pounding, but her fear tempered by the unexpected strength she felt standing beside this man. Slowly, reluctantly, the sounds outside began to change. The distinct creak of saddle leather, the muffled snorts of horses as riders shifted. The aggressive edge in the voices lessened, replaced by muttering, curses, a grudging defeat. This ain't over, Harmon, the first voice yelled, lacking its earlier bluster. Go on now, Harmon said, his voice calm again, but with an steel undertone that promised swift consequence if they lingered. They rode away, slowly at first, then faster, their horses' hooves crunching in the snow as they retreated, swallowed by the vast white wilderness. The sounds faded, until only the wind remained. Harmon lowered his rifle, but didn't relax his stance immediately. He listened for a long moment, ensuring they were truly gone. Nara listened too, her body still tense, until the silence outside felt complete. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The children, sensing the shift, began to stir properly, looking up at her with questioning eyes. Harmon closed the door, barring it again. The cabin felt small, quiet, intensely private after the confrontation. He leaned the rifle against the wall and turned, his gaze meeting hers. There were no words needed. In his eyes, she saw the cost of his stand, the weary knowledge that this might not be the end of it. But there was also something else, a quiet satisfaction, perhaps, or simply the reflection of the same resilience she saw in herself. She nodded, a deeper bow of the head this time, a gesture of profound gratitude that words could not convey. He accepted it with a small, almost imperceptible nod in return. The children, seeing the tension ease, began to move around, curious and finally feeling safe. Nara looked at her children, then back at Harmon. He had saved them, not just from the snow, but from the cruelty of men. He had seen their humanity when others saw only something to be feared and hated. This stranger, this outsider, had offered sanctuary and protection when her own world had been shattered. It was a bond forged in the crucible of shared danger, a quiet understanding that transcended language and background. Her journey had been one of loss and flight, leaving her vulnerable and alone. But standing here, in this simple cabin, with her children safe and a man who had unexpectedly become an ally, she felt a surge of strength she hadn't known she possessed. Resilience wasn't just about enduring. It was about finding light in the deepest darkness, about recognizing connection in the most unexpected places. The world outside remained harsh, prejudiced, and dangerous, but within these walls, a seed of hope had been planted. They had faced death and cruelty and had found, not just survival, but a flicker of shared dignity, a quiet testament to the enduring power of compassion in a merciless land. They were still on a difficult path, but they would face it together, this unlikely family forged by snow and hate.